Foreign interests just cannot leave Africa alone. This week, a meeting took place between two African puppets. What's even worse about this is that there is a direct link between these two African presidents and General Michael Langley. So it seems even though Michael Langley is already on his way out, I made a video about that a few days ago, his actions are still bearing fruit here on the continent. So in this video, we're gonna break down the meeting of puppets, and I'm gonna give you my opinion of what they were up to beyond the sanitized, publicly stated reasons for their meeting. This is information every African and every African diaspora needs to understand, because we wanna make sure we don't get the wool pulled over our eyes, and we can never forget where these guys come from, and that is key. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Now, I'm going to expose a link between General Michael Langley of Africa Command from the United States, the French government, who have been meddling and dealing with the Francophone countries for many years now, the Ivory Coast President, Ouattara, and Doumbouya, the president that got to power by doing a military coup and was the subject of this very uncomfortable conversation in the United States Senate.
What percentage of the people we've trained end up participating in insurrections or coups against their own government?
Very small number, Congressman, very small number.
So what percentage do you think?
I'd say probably less than 1%.
But it does happen.
The IMET program is in force in... Congressman, you may have that information. I don't at this time, but I know...
Well, I know there are some, right? Like go ahead and throw up that image. This is Colonel Mamady Doumbouya, and this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him? In Guinea?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that guy in the middle with the big red hat, Colonel Mamady Doumbouya, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken, in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader.
Let me start with what actually happened this week. On June 17th, Guinea's President Mamady Doumbouya landed in Abidjan for a 48-hour visit with Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara. Doumbouya got the full red carpet treatment at the presidential palace. He was welcomed at 12:44 p.m. at Félix Houphouët-Boigny International Airport by Ivory Coast Vice President Tiemoko Meiliet Kone. The official agenda called it a friendship and working visit designed to strengthen historical and strategic ties between the two countries. Doumbouya told the press it was an immense honor to be in Côte d'Ivoire, land of resilience and progress. He said he wanted to learn from Ouattara's stability and economic progress.
Mr. President, this shows the esteem you hold to the Republic of Guinea and to my modest person on this happy occasion. Allow me to mention the President to transmit fraternal greetings of the people of Guinea. I am here not only as President of the Republic of Guinea, but as a brother, as a friend, and as a son of Africa.
I would like to reiterate my thanks. For the quality of our exchanges, I form wishes for the smooth running of the process initiated in Guinea, and reaffirms the availability of the Ivory Coast to work towards strengthening historical friendship of fraternity and cooperation.
The official statements talked about consolidating relations between the two West African neighbors. They spoke about shared values and mutual cooperation. But here's what they didn't tell you. What you're seeing is two Western puppets coordinating strategy right on the borders of the AES states. Both men are enemies of Ibrahim Traoré and everything the AES movement represents. This wasn't a friendship visit. This was a strategy session between hostile forces. Now let me blow your mind with the real story behind this meeting. Mamady Doumbouya didn't just randomly decide to visit Ouattara for inspiration. These two men have a history that goes back to 2011. Back then, Doumbouya was a corporal in the French Foreign Legion. In April 2011, French forces launched Operation Licorne to remove Laurent Gbagbo from power in Ivory Coast. Doumbouya was part of that operation. He literally helped install Alassane Ouattara as president through military force. The 2011 Ivory Coast crisis was a perfect example of how Western powers use military intervention to install their preferred leaders. Gbagbo had won the election, but Western powers didn't like the result. They claimed fraud and used it as justification for military action. French troops, supported by UN peacekeepers, bombarded the presidential palace until Gbagbo surrendered. Doumbouya was there as a French Foreign Legion soldier, participating in the operation that put Ouattara in power. Think about that for a second. The man who is now Guinea's president helped put Ouattara in power using French military might. Now, 14 years later, he's back in Abidjan asking that same man for advice on how to run a country. This is the perfect example of how the neocolonial system works. France trains the soldiers install French puppets, then the puppets mentor each other. It's a closed loop of control that perpetuates Western dominance across generations. This reveals something crucial about how France and America maintain power in Africa. They don't just pick random people to support. They invest years training their assets, building relationships, and creating networks of mutual dependence. Doumbouya served 15 years in the French Foreign Legion. He was deployed to Afghanistan, Ivory Coast, Djibouti, and the Central African Republic. During these deployments, he learned Western military tactics, absorbed Western political thinking, and built connections with Western intelligence services. But that's not all. He also received training from the American military. In 2023, General Michael Langley testified before the US Senate about America's training relationships in West Africa. He specifically mentioned training programs that included Guinean military officers. These programs teach more than just military skills. They create ideological alignment and personal relationships that last for decades. This alliance between Guinea and Ivory Coast looks like the final fruit of General Michael Langley's work as he exits his role as leader of Africa Command. Langley has been quietly building these puppet networks across West Africa for years. His training programs created the relationships we're seeing play out today. I've already covered how Langley likely got removed from his position because of the disastrous public relations damage he created for America in recent months. His heavy-handed approach and failed strategies in the Sahel exposed American operations that were supposed to stay hidden. But even as Langley exits Africa Command, his years of meddling are still bearing fruit. The Doumbouya-Ouattara alliance represents the culmination of his network-building efforts. These aren't natural partnerships between African leaders. These are manufactured relationships created through years of American training, funding, and coordination. Langley may be gone, but his puppet network remains active. Both France and America invested in the same man. This shows you how the two powers coordinate their puppet networks across Africa. They share intelligence, coordinate training programs, and ensure their assets can work together when needed. The Doumbouya-Ouattara meeting is the result of this coordinated investment paying off. After Doumbouya overthrew Alpha Condé in September 2021, something interesting happened. The international community stayed silent. No global outrage, no emergency UN meetings, no sanctions. The African Union suspended Guinea's membership, but that was largely symbolic. Western powers made no serious efforts to restore the previous government or punish the coup leaders. Compare that to what happened when the AES states had their military transitions. The world went crazy, immediate condemnation, economic sanctions, threats of military intervention. ECO was imposed harsh sanctions on the AES countries. Western media painted their leaders as dangerous dictators, threatening regional stability. William Ruto of Kenya perfectly represents this hypocrisy. He has repeatedly condemned the AES governments. He demands that Africa follow democratic principles. He says military coups have no place on the continent. At international forums, he presents himself as a champion of democracy and constitutional order. He has called for isolation of military governments and restoration of civilian rule. But where was Ruto when Doumbouya took power in Guinea? Complete silence. Not a single statement condemning the coup. No calls for democratic restoration. No demands for sanctions. Ruto treated Doumbouya's takeover as an internal African matter that didn't require international intervention. As I record, Ruto faces massive protests from Kenyans who are angry about his government's failures at every level, including the murder of activist Albert Ojwang. This gives us two clear reasons to ignore what Ruto says. First, he only condemns military leaders when they oppose Western powers, but stays quiet when Western allies take power by force. Second, despite his smooth talking and fake smiles, his own people are in the streets proving he doesn't serve African interests. This exposes the real formula that Western powers use. If you're aligned with Western interests, your military coup gets accepted as a necessary correction. The media finds ways to justify it. International leaders express quiet understanding. Sanctions never materialize. If you choose sovereignty over submission, you get global condemnation. The same action gets completely different reactions based on who you serve after taking power. The selective outrage reveals the true nature of Western democracy promotion. It's not about democratic values or constitutional order. It's about maintaining control. Democracy is only valuable when it produces Western-friendly results. When democratic processes threaten Western interests, they become obstacles to be removed. Doumbouya isn't just randomly figuring out how to legitimize his rule. He's following a well-established Western playbook for legitimizing preferred military leaders. The process always follows the same pattern. First, there's an extended transition period that allows the military leader to consolidate power while claiming to prepare for democracy. Then comes national dialogues that exclude real opposition voices. Next, a new constitution gets drafted that consolidates the leader's power and provides immunity for military actions. After that, there's a constitutional referendum that passes with suspicious margins. Finally, managed elections are held where the military leader conveniently wins with overwhelming support. The West then celebrates this as a successful democratic transition, even though the outcome was predetermined from the beginning. This legitimacy theatre takes several years and includes multiple stages designed to create the appearance of democratic consultation. But it's all window dressing to make Western puppets look legitimate while keeping them in power. The process provides enough democratic appearances to satisfy international observers while ensuring the preferred outcome. Doumbouya is following this exact playbook. He has scheduled a constitutional referendum for September 21st, 2025. Elections are promised for December 2025. He's conducting national consultations that exclude genuine opposition voices. He's drafting constitutional changes that will allow him to run for president while giving his military government immunity for past actions. This isn't democracy. This is manufactured legitimacy designed to transform a military coup into an acceptable government that Western powers can openly support. The timing of this Guinea-Ivory Coast alliance isn't coincidental. Both countries share borders with AES states. Guinea borders Mali along an 858-kilometer frontier. Ivory Coast borders Burkina Faso along a 545-kilometer frontier, and Mali along a 532-kilometer frontier. These two puppet leaders are now coordinating right on the doorstep of the sovereignty movement. Geographic positioning matters in geopolitics. Control of neighboring territories provides multiple advantages. It allows surveillance of target countries. It enables economic pressure through trade route control. It provides staging areas for military operations. It creates refugee crises that can destabilize target governments. What you're seeing is an attempt at making a coordinated network of Western proxies bordering the AES states. This isn't random. This is strategic encirclement designed to contain and pressure the sovereignty movement. Every AES state now has Western-aligned neighbors on multiple borders. The encirclement strategy has historical precedence. During the Cold War, Western powers used similar tactics to contain Soviet influence. They built networks of allied states around target countries. They provided military aid, economic support, and political backing to these allies. They used them to pressure, isolate, and ultimately destabilize governments that chose alternative paths. Ouattara brings specific anti-AES credentials to this alliance. His government has been accused of harboring the people who tried to assassinate Ibrahim Traoré. Multiple sources suggest that assassination plotters fled to Ivory Coast after their failed attempt. Instead of arresting these individuals and extraditing them to Burkina Faso, Ouattara's government allegedly provided them with protection. Think about that. The president of a neighboring country is allegedly giving safe haven to assassins targeting the leader of Burkina Faso. Harboring assassination plotters violates every principle of international law and regional cooperation. What does the United States do in the middle of this violation? They begin establishing a drone base in Ivory Coast. They claim it's for regional security and counterterrorism operations. Some may argue that this amounts to complicity in state-sponsored terrorism, but in the interest of fair reporting, we must acknowledge that plausible deniability remains. The surveillance capabilities of modern military drones are massive. These systems can track individual vehicles from hundreds of kilometers away, intercept communications, map military installations, and identify key personnel. But surveillance is just the beginning. The same drones can conduct targeted operations and deliver precision strikes. The same bases used for intelligence gathering can launch covert military operations. The presence of American drone technology in Ivory Coast represents a direct military threat to the AES states. Now you have two puppet leaders meeting while one of them hosts American military technology aimed at the AES states. This isn't diplomacy, this is coordination for potential military action. The timing suggests that Western powers are preparing for escalated confrontation with the sovereignty movement. The economic dimension of this alliance is equally dangerous for the AES states. The CFA franc system still controls the economies of both Guinea and Ivory Coast. This gives France direct power over their monetary policy, exchange rates, and foreign reserves. French officials sit on the boards of their central banks. French companies get preferential access to government contracts. French banks control most financial transactions. The AES states have been working to break free from this economic slavery. They're developing their own currency arrangements. They're building trade relationships with non-Western partners. They're renegotiating resource extraction deals to ensure fair compensation for their natural wealth. But puppet neighbors can be used to enforce economic isolation. They can block trade routes between AES states and global markets. They can refuse to honor new currency arrangements, forcing continued dependence on Western financial systems. They can implement sanctions at the regional level that bypass international law. Economic warfare becomes much easier when you control the countries surrounding your target. Here's what makes this alliance particularly threatening. The AES states control massive natural resources that Western powers desperately need. By now, we all understand that they're demanding fair prices for their resources. This threatens the entire Western extraction system that has operated since their so-called independence. The puppet alliance between Guinea and Ivory Coast gives Western powers new tools to pressure the AES states. They can use these neighboring countries to create artificial shortages of essential goods. They can block new trade routes that bypass Western control. They can provide staging areas for military intervention if other methods fail. Consider the strategic implications. Guinea controls access to Mali from the west. Ivory Coast controls access to both Mali and Burkina Faso from the south. Together, they can create an economic chokehold that makes it extremely difficult for AES states to develop alternative trade relationships. The generational aspect of this conflict cannot be ignored. Doumbouya is 44 years old, but his thinking represents the previous generation of African leadership. Ouattara is 82 years old and literally represents the independence generation that accepted neocolonial arrangements. These are men who were educated in Western systems. They built their careers serving Western interests. They see their role as managing their countries for foreign benefit rather than African development. But younger Africans increasingly reject this model. They support leaders who put African interests first. Ouattara faces presidential elections in October, and there's growing pressure from citizens who demand the kind of sovereignty that Traoré represents. This demographic shift terrifies Western powers because they know their puppet system has limited time. The question remains, what damage can these two leaders inflict on the sovereignty movement before their influence wanes? The current generation of Western-educated African leaders is aging out. Their replacements are increasingly choosing sovereignty over submission. Opinion polls across Africa show growing support for leaders who stand up to Western pressure. Young Africans admire the AES states for their independence and courage. This explains the desperation behind the Guinea-Ivory Coast alliance. Western powers are consolidating their remaining assets before they lose them completely. They're using their current puppets to contain the sovereignty movement while they still can. But this strategy has a fundamental weakness. It depends on controlling populations that increasingly reject Western domination. The broader implications reach beyond West Africa. The African Union has been paralyzed by this puppet network. When AES states need continental support, the Western-aligned countries vote against them. This prevents African unity and keeps the continent divided. Instead of speaking with one voice on international issues, Africa remains fragmented between competing power blocs. The voting patterns in ECOWAS tell the same story. Every decision splits along the same lines. Puppet states support Western positions regardless of African interests. Sovereign states support African positions that prioritize continental development. There's no middle ground anymore. The organization has become a battleground between neo-colonial control and African independence. What we're witnessing is the end game of the struggle for African independence. The colonial powers never really left, they just changed their methods. Instead of direct rule, they use economic control and puppet governments. Instead of colonial administrators, they use trained local assets. Instead of colonial armies, they use proxy forces and drone technology. The AES states broke this system by choosing genuine independence. They kicked out foreign troops that were supposed to provide security, but actually guaranteed Western control. They renegotiated resource deals to ensure local benefit rather than foreign extraction. They started building relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. This success inspired other African countries to consider similar paths. The puppet alliance between Guinea and Ivory Coast represents the colonial powers' response. They're using their remaining assets to contain the sovereignty movement. They're showing other African leaders what happens when you choose independence. You get surrounded by hostile neighbors backed by Western military power. But this strategy reveals Western weakness as much as Western strength. The fact that they need to coordinate puppet states against three landlocked countries shows how powerful the sovereignty model has become. The AES states didn't need foreign troops or military bases to defend themselves. They used popular support and smart diplomacy to maintain their independence. The meeting between Doumbouya and Ouattara marks a new phase in this struggle. The days of subtle influence are over. Now we're seeing open coordination between Western proxies against African sovereignty. The battle lines are clearly drawn between those who serve foreign interests and those who serve African interests. Every African needs to understand what's happening here. This isn't about democracy versus military rule. Both Doumbouya and Ouattara came to power through force, one in a recent coup, the other through foreign military intervention. The difference is who they serve after taking power. Puppet leaders serve foreign interests. Sovereign leaders serve African interests. The choice facing Africa is simple but crucial. Accept the puppet network system where neighboring countries serve foreign interests against you, or support the sovereignty model where African countries work together for African benefit. There's no neutral position in this struggle. The Guinea-Ivory Coast alliance shows that Western powers will use any method to maintain control. They will coordinate puppet governments, they will establish military bases, they will harbor assassins, they will manipulate regional organizations, they will do whatever it takes to prevent African independence. But the AES states have proven that resistance is possible. They've shown that African countries can choose their own partners, control their own resources, and defend their own interests. This success terrifies the colonial powers because it destroys their entire system of control. The meeting in Abidjan wasn't just two presidents having a friendly chat. It was a strategy session between enemy forces. The sovereignty movement is spreading across Africa, and the puppet network is responding with coordinated opposition. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for every African who wants genuine independence. The battle for African sovereignty is happening right now, and the outcome will determine the continent's future for generations to come. So what do you guys think out there? Do you think I hit the nail on the head, or is there something I missed? Please tell me in the comments if you've got something to say. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much for you to write the words "end the meddling" in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched this video to the end, you support the channel, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to keep going. Thanks so much for watching this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.